For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Visit us online at faith.yale.edu. You're listening to For the Life of the World, and I'm Evan Rosa with the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Today's episode is the final installment of our 5-part book club series, produced and hosted by Kelly Corrigan. The PBS host and author of 4 New York Times best-selling memoirs took a deep dive into the latest book from the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. It was written by Miroslav Volf, Matt Krosman, and Ryan McAnally-Linz. It's called Life Worth Living, A Guide to What Matters Most. The book is based on a Yale College course that takes up some of the most pressing questions of life, pulling in all of those implications, challenges, perplexity, demands, and opportunities. Both the course and the book are based on the core truth that our lives are too important to be guided by anything less than what matters most, but also by a core conviction that we're too often concerned with just getting what we want and not nearly concerned enough with what's worth wanting in the first place. And in this final episode of the series, Kelly Corrigan synthesizes and reflects and distills practical steps and key takeaways from her exploration of the book, framing important moments from her podcast book club with Kate Bowler and Claire Danes. If you've been following along with the book club and reading the book, that's fantastic. Thank you. And we all know that experience of finishing a book we love and wanting some more. If that does happen to be you, head over to lifeworthlivingbook.com. That's where we'll continue to provide additional resources, podcast appearances, events, other stuff to read, listen to, and watch. But perhaps the best next thing you might do is bring this book to your own community. Read it again with friends. Download our discussion guide that goes through each chapter with quotes and questions at lifeworthlivingbook.com. Join our Life Worth Living email list and invite more people into conversations worth having. Finally, thank you to Kelly Corrigan, Tammy Stedman, Kate Bowler, and Claire Danes for the time and energy, reflection, and vulnerability that went into this series, as well as the Warren Smoot Carter III and Meagan Carter Charitable Fund for making this series possible. And thank you for listening, friends. Next week, we'll be back to original episodes, and we're excited to bring a whole new batch of conversations about seeking and living a life worthy of our humanity. Enjoy.
Welcome to Kelly Corrigan Wonders. I'm Kelly Corrigan, and today I am so sad to be wrapping up the Life Worth Living series. So, in case you haven't been with us for the past month, we found a book called Life Worth Living, A Guide to What Matters Most. And I was pretty dumbstruck by the questions that this book asks. And I was so grateful that there were no answers proposed by the book. Instead of answers, what they give us is a little collection of voices, some going back 5,000 years, who are thinking through each question in their own terms. So you might get one question like, what should a good life feel like? Should it be all pleasure, no pain? Should it be every emotion on the wheel? What's the role of suffering in a good life? And then instead of answering that question, the authors of this book, who I adore, Miroslav Volf, Matthew Krosman, and Ryan McAnally-Linz, will give you a smattering of answers on that question. What does Oscar Wilde say? What does Nietzsche say? What does Sigmund Freud say? What does Peter Singer say? What does an economist say? What does the Buddha say? So after I read Life Worth Living, I reached out to Miroslav and the guys at Yale and said, I got ideas about this thing. I want to talk about it. I want to offer it up as a workshop for the listeners of Kelly Corrigan Wonders. And then I had this follow-on idea that maybe we could get a couple of great people to book club this with me. And so we started with Yale alums, and that's how we got to Kate Bowler, who graduated from the Divinity School there, and Claire Danes, who spent a couple years studying at Yale before she went back to acting. So over the course of 4 conversations, we've touched on a lot of topics, and I felt like the very best thing I could do for all of us is to offer up some kind of final episode where we summarize some of the themes and ideas that we came to. I'm going to try to do it in 3 acts. In Act 1, we'll look at 3 related questions. The first is, what was the first story of the world that you knew? Because, of course, no one comes into their consciousness totally neutral. I'm not always a huge fan of looking back unless it's framed and limited. And so in this case, I felt like the book asks you to consider your parents, who likely were a big part of how you initially saw yourself in context of the world. So who were they? Who were their parents? What was their childhood like? What are their religions or philosophies? What hobbies and habits? What were their dreams? Which were realized and which were deferred? And how does all of that land on you? We spent some time talking about our initial organizing principles. In other words, our very first story of what the world is and how we fit into it. And it turns out that Kate, Claire, and I had more or less the same ethos handed down to us, an ethos that had to do with humility.
It's hard to distill, but my parents, I feel like it's a series of idioms that just kind of made up my moral landscape. Like, you're not the only pebble on the beach,
Great delivery. You really are a good actress.
Both my parents grew up in New England, so I think there's a kind of puritanical streak in there. My mom was one of 5. So, yes, this idea that there was this wasn't even inherited from her mom or anything. It was like a schoolyard taunt that she, again, would repeat a lot, which is, you think you're so big, which is not unrelated to you're not the only pebble on the beach, right? So I think that it was, you're one of many, and, humility was a big, important deal.
Sometimes my dad says it in a really dramatic way, but it's always like, memento mori, Kate. Like, remember, thou art mortal, something he has said, I don't know, at least one time this week. And I'm like, oh, Dad, like, do you think that I really struggle with being an asshole?
Right.
I just kind of feel like maybe 42 years into my life, like self-esteem is not exactly like high on my list of virtues. But we had a lot of, I guess maybe because we were all kind of very sensitive, musical kids. My mom's a professional musician and my dad's a historian. And so I think the desire to constantly present historical facts in our childhood classroom presentations or sing songs or share our deepest vulnerabilities gave us a high tolerance for just put it all out there, and also low expectations of this will be very well received. So I guess I did always think, no one thinks you're that great, but you have a huge responsibility to do your very, very best, even if it's kind of emotionally costly.
My mom used to say, oh, for God's sake, Kelly, who's looking at you? Which is the same thing.
So we all had the same parents then. Every take it down all the notches is so key to my personality.
The other piece of understanding what your very first story of the world was is trying to remember what you thought your adult life would be like. What was that initial vision? And Claire and Kate and I all had really these sort of tiny flames of vocation going all the way back to our childhoods.
I'm pretty weird because I knew I wanted to be an actor when I was 5, and I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
And it was very clear to me. And I started dancing when I was 4 and performed in a, semi-professional way, really just because some dance companies would come to my dance class looking for young talent, and I was hammy and conspicuous and would often get picked. And these were very modest productions on the Lower East Side, these black box theaters, but I had a taste for what it was to be performing to an audience of 11 people, and really liked it. And then it wasn't too long after that I kind of realized that acting was a subdivision of performance in general, and that was particularly exciting to me. And I, took acting classes at Lee Strasberg as a kid, and blah, blah. Wow. But somebody told me when I was around 9 that actors didn't typically make all that much money, that it was a fairly insecure life, which did concern me. So
it did?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up, again, New York City. I mean, I was aware of the realities of play. And so I thought, okay, I'll be a therapist and I'll do acting workshops on the side just to feed my spirit. I was going to live in the suburbs next to my best friend, Ariel, who's still my best friend.
Aww.
And is actually a therapist. And we were, and we were going to like share a pool that we would have 2 slides in our respective yards. That we go. Like, it was very thorough.
Amazing.
But I after a year of having that line and that plan, I made a formal announcement to my parents and said, who am I kidding? Like, money or no money, this is it. I'm an actor.
And you're at 12 at this point?
I was 10.
I wanted to be a historian.
That's so funny because
Really?
I wanted to be a writer. Like, everybody got what they wanted at this table, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And perhaps obnoxious. We don't
A
know.
historian. How did you know that you wanted? What was the moment? Was there an epiphanous like point?
My dad is a historian in, and now I can say it because both my parents are retired, the worst university in Canada. Congratulations, University of Manitoba, for ranking last of last every year on the, it is the worst university in Canada, and we live right basically on the edge of campus.
Okay.
And every August, it's often an agricultural school, so they'll test manures. And we would go out into the yard, and my dad would be like, oh, learning has begun. I was like, wow, this is not the glamour but I basically grew up in this bungalow, just so many book spores, library.
Right.
And I knew that good lives are curious lives, and you could do this forever. And that was kind of the feeling with books and stories. Is like, no matter how many books I read, it will just, on the long, clothesline of my mind, I will just get more and more and more and more hooks.
Right.
And it will make life hilariously lower middle class if I am lucky. Because my dad had been terribly depressed for most of my childhood because he had never gotten the job that would have validated all of the time he put in to become a historian. And so by the time he decided that he was going to write anyway, he was 70 when he self-published his dissertation just to not put it through the machine of publication. He's so, it really gave me an account of beautiful long form storytelling. And you can be the one that like drills the well yourself and finds all the original research, or you can be the one that like knows how to create lovely accounts culled from all of these other sources. And I just realized that even like in whatever version, I never thought of myself as I'm going to be a writer. I thought I'm going to know how to tell a really long story. So that was
Long.
it. Long.
Not even good.
It'll last forever. The second huge question of Act 1 is about control and responsibility. It's about agency and choices and agency limiters, like in the case of Kate Bowler's father's depression, or in the case of Kate Bowler, stage 4 cancer. The world did kind of act on your dad in a way that made you probably pursue a career in a different way.
Yeah, I think too, maybe because a lot of the mental illnesses that we are all very familiar with, like are maybe also just best understood as agency limiters. Someone who is overwhelmed with depression, it so constricts their framework for possibility that it's almost like it's the disease of despair.
Yeah.
And so because of that, choice just kind of slips away. So when I see anyone with choice, I do feel like I just want to like, grab it and like cup it in my hand, knowing it's always water. Most of the architecture of my life, most significant things that have ever happened have happened to me. And so I right where I was born, the career patterns of my family and the way that shaped me, but mostly like, did I spend most of my 30s trying not to die of cancer?
Right.
How long did I have miscarriages and then had one kid that I felt so lucky for? But just like ding, ding, ding. Although like I would say most of the kind of primary movers have been not mine. But that has oddly made me even more intense about the choices I have. So even though I have like a real framework for limited agency, I'm very, very intense about the few choices I have. So like you'll see the crazy in my eyes because I'm just like, I'm like a full bulldozer about like what I can choose, I will.
Thinking about choices and fate led Claire, Kate, and me to an appreciation about lives ruled by circumstances.
I'm very suspicious of people who take disproportionate credit for the success or failure of their lives. Yeah. So I think we are heavily informed by, the cards we're dealt, the circumstance that we arrive in for whatever reason. But yeah, it's a push-pull, right? I mean, we are always interpreting those cards. I mean, some games afford us more latitude than others, but we have a certain amount of control and responsibility. I'm very pregnant as I speak with you today.
And we're ready to catch. That's how pregnant she is. She's sitting on the edge of her chair, listener.
And this was not intentional, this pregnancy. And it's been an interesting ride because I assumed that I had willed the previous children into being. And this really punctured that illusion, right? So I'm very humbled by this. And it's I think I really love enjoying the fiction that I am authoring my reality. Yeah. And every once in a while, I'll get a very a resoundingly clear message.
Clear sign. Like, the next 18 years of my life is something different now.
Nope.
I do struggle to have compassion for people who think of themselves overwhelmingly as choosers. The life is a series of choices, people. Yeah. They're always in like a slim cut button up and they're just like between lunches. Right. And I want so much to be happy for them.
Right. Every meal is a lunch. That they're doing.
That's right. Yeah.
Miroslav, Matt, and Ryan, in their course at Yale and in their book, offer a callback to Smokey the Bear, whose message was, only you can stop forest fires, as a way of asking us to consider, like, are we responsible for forest fires? And if so, what else might be in our forest? Like, just how far and wide does our responsibility extend?
I do feel like my life is supposed to be some kind of alignment between vocation, like gifts were given, and then the deepest expression of service that I can have inside of my actual limitations. That's the part I'm struggling with because I'm so often like sick and then fine, or grandiose and then unbelievably tired, depending on. But I do think we're like, I'm supposed to be bound into a set of ethical responsibilities, like financially, congregationally.
All I can tell you is that I've started to think about that question.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer to it, but it's present in me in a way that's probably to my betterment.
I think it's like you start with the most immediate and the most obvious, family, and probably it kind of circles out from there. I would say my first answer is my parents, right? And then my children now, my husband, my bestie. But I feel like I do have these other relationships that I can't name, but I am in a weird conversation with some other forces. And I don't know if they're just values that I've personified in my psyche somehow, or in the deep recesses of my, I don't know what.
I must confess, I had not thought about this before. I had thought in the most obvious terms. I'm responsible to my children, to my mother, to my husband. But the question they're asking here is much, much bigger. Kate, who is so informed by 7 years of cancer treatment, had this to say.
I was trying to think of what are your allegiances? I feel very committed to healthcare policy more than I do most other issues. Yeah. And I do so it's been maybe 7 years since my diagnosis. And since then, the idea that there's like a community of suffering people, like fellowship of the afflicted, is so key to how I think about who I'm responsible for, and also how many people there are like us in the world.
The last question in Act 1 took us to that rubber meets road question. How does your budget reflect or insult your values?
This is the scariest question.
I did not like that.
No,
I didn't like it. And if you listen,
indulgent heathens.
your audiobook version too, it's like you can hear the gulp in your voice. And because it was you, as your friend, I felt accused.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that more than any. Well, and I immediately contacted my accountant because I was having this huge spiral about I have had kind of a spiral about it. I was like, am I a bad person?
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave that unfinished.
This one is really challenging. I mean, it really very uncomfortable about it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's probably a horrible disparity between what I say I care about and how I spend my dollars.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I mean, we do have a big chunk of money that we save to give to causes that we care about. And I also buy so much nonsense. I mean, I love clicking the buttons and getting
me too.
a new shiny whatever it is.
Claire was moved to share something she had not shared before about a dream she had when she was very young.
I had this crazy revelatory dream when I was 11, honestly, that was like a big download, and it's how I make sense of everything. It's wild. I haven't really talked about it to many people, but I was totally changed when I woke up from this dream. But in the dream, I had died, and I was kind of moving into another phase of being. And I was in this black space, and there were all these parallel white lines, and I was reflecting on my life. And there were all these truths that were immediately revealed about our existence in this plane. And there were like 7 planes basically in total. And ours was very rudimentary. And I knew that one of the great virtues and privileges of this world was how physical it was, and the joy and the pleasure that there was to experience here. And it would be sinful not to really make the most of that and submit to that fully. And that it was extraordinarily just beautiful and lush. And that is not going to be replicated in future iterations of existence. And we can't see beyond the physical space. We're so limited, and that's okay. And anyway, there were other things, but so I never feel that guilty about taking pleasure in material stuff and in beautiful physical things, because I think it's one of the gifts of this plane.
Here are a few key takeaways from Act 1. We don't know what planes of existence there may or may not be waiting for us. Number 2, the physical world has beauty, and that beauty is a gift that we are meant to enjoy. Number 3, we are indeed not the only pebble on the beach. We are not that big. Coming up next, we'll get into Act 2 and take a look at which emotions are normal. What should we expect in the course of a life? What's alarming? What's a signal to be heeded? We'll be right back with Kelly Corrigan Wonders. Welcome back to Kelly Corrigan Wonders. I'm Kelly Corrigan, and today I'm trying to synthesize my takeaways from a series of conversations with actress Claire Danes and Professor Kate Bowler about a book we all read called Life Worth Living. Act 2 is fundamentally about what emotions are normal. What should we expect in the course of a life? What is alarming? What is a signal to be heeded? This took us into very interesting places, talking about anger, envy, shame, regret, sorrow, and melancholy. Sometimes I feel jealous of people who are naturally skinny. I just want to admit it. Mm-hmm. I also feel very jealous as a writer of people who have been touched by Oprah's magic wand. Mm-hmm. Just seems like that would be so great. How does envy show up in your life? Mm-hmm. Cop to it.
Yeah. All right. This is actually one of the glitches in my personality is I don't feel envious about normal stuff.
Okay.
whenever someone does something really amazing, I always think like, wow, good for you, because simultaneously like, oh, I could never do that. That's so amazing. So it does feel, that part feels easy. The part that feels gross and makes me full of rage is people who feel like they're in control of their lives, people who boast about really lovely things they should be able to be happy about, but I know they weren't in charge of. And then I start to feel angry. Like, here's my bazillion grandkids. I'm like, well, good for you. Everybody lived. I'm so happy for you. And then I get into like even if they're just happy, it always feels a bit like gloating, even though I should just let people have it. Part of me gets very county.
County, that's a good word.
The second I'm running math, then that's envy.
That's right.
And and people who feel like they're in control of their like health and working out. I love working out, but I'm so constantly debilitated by problems I can't fix. And then I'm like, wow, you just did a 0 to 5K. I'm so happy for you. So I get very...
Is that your favorite Peloton instructor?
Yeah.
Oh, I love her.
It's incredible. It's just determination.
When I'm not having diarrhea.
Yeah, I do. I think I mostly get really jealous of control narratives because I crave it so much. And then
what do you do with it? Like, do you have a technique?
Oh, don't worry. It mostly turns like a blade where I just hold the dagger by the blade and I just ram it into my own sweetheart. Yeah. So no, mostly I just use it as my own frustration. But sometimes it just mostly makes me feel like an alien. So it feels kind of more like embarrassment, which isn't. I wouldn't pick that for someone else, but that's kind of where I go.
Yeah. Envy is miserable, isn't it? And it's unavoidable. And sometimes it flares. I mean, sometimes I'm more vulnerable to it than others. And it has everything to do with how fulfilled I am and how stable or comfortable I am. And it can be a real surprise when it suddenly becomes aggravated. And it's never really about the person that I seem to be envying. But I'm persuaded by the illusion every time, but it's always feedback about what is kind of kinky or misaligned within myself or what I'm wanting but feel at a remove from for whatever reason. I mean, that's very vague, but
it's a great interpretation though. It's a great exercise to run is like, there's probably another day where you could come across this fact about someone else and think, good for you. And so it's like, what's the difference between that day and this day?
Right.
And the difference is something internal.
And it goes quickly to shame too, right? Like I don't have that thing because I am deficient or and just not enough or uninvited or unwanted. And that is deeply unpleasant and also something that I think we've all encountered on a daily basis, but
and sometimes I can't tell if it's anger too because I'm not quick enough to recognize anger.
Right.
But sometimes envy should actually just be rage. Like, oh, actually you took that belonged to me.
Right.
'Cause sometimes things do belong to us.
But I recognize what you're saying too about people that I envy. It's like they have a veneer of kind of glibness or it's just all just, I don't know. It's not my fault.
That's crazy.
Hey, it just happened. And you go,
but the thing, the book's super concerned with like what's worth doing and what's worth wanting.
Yes.
And sometimes I feel like one of the reveals of envy is that it shows you something that may or may not be worth your time and desire. Where it's like, oh, okay. So you just glanced at her Instagram followers or you just found out that she won Podcast of the Year. And then you have to double back and you have to land somewhere that's more stable and say, is that what I'm doing? Is that the game I'm playing? Wait a second. That's not like a worthy game.
Right.
What's the game? The game is like produce great content, make things you're proud of, try to be useful, whatever it is, whatever desire puts you in the position you're in.
Yeah.
Already, you have to like reconnect to it. And that often makes it fall because it just doesn't stand up to the scrutiny. Kate and Claire admitted something that I too share, which is I want ease for my children, even as I see the role of obstacles discomfort, and struggle. This other big section of the book, which is another thing I'd never thought about, is like, what should life feel like? And I think it's huge experience for us to come to terms with that and to share that widely with especially our children.
I guess as a mom, I always want my children to be safe and at ease, which is not the desirable state, actually. That's not what they want or need necessarily. I'm like compulsive about delivering that to them and for them. And they actually really benefit enormously from some grit and some obstacles and, you know, an opportunity to be a little afraid and to struggle and push against their limitations and be genuinely unsure if they're going to, you know, manage it.
Yeah, it's like a low growth state. Like rest and repreve and safety is kind of low growth.
Right.
But then, you know, there's times.
But, I mean, you need both. But it's just kind of negotiating those two tensions, I guess, constantly.
I think I've overcorrected on that too. I partly because I was so worried when Zach was little that I was going to be sick and that it was going to be miserable. And so I made a really thick bubble around like, this is the safe and wonderful and now fun place. And this is the place where we have friends and family all the time and everyone is at your disposal. Yeah. I had to go to a funeral a couple days ago and I really just should have brought him. And I feel so protective around pain.
Finally, before we leave this act, I wanted to recall a key distinction Claire made between chosen and conscripted service, depression and melancholy, suffering in which we have mobility, and suffering that pins us down.
I remembered when I was younger, I had a boyfriend who did really struggle with depression and he was talking about that. And I said, but I kind of love that feeling of sorrow or sadness. There's real kind of pleasure in that. And he said, then you've never been depressed. And that was a like really
melancholy.
Yeah, it was an interesting correction. I was very chastened by that and grateful for that insight because, you know, it's almost like how we were kind of contextualizing service, right? If you can find meaning in it, if it feels voluntary and, you know, then there's real value in it. And if it feels imposed upon you, then it can be really awful and suffocating. So I think there's so many different kinds of grief, right? Or, you know, a kind of negative feeling. And if there's something to discover within it, if you feel active within it, then that can be beautiful. But if it's an assault or if it kind of makes you small and limited, then it's a real problem.
Yeah, if you're like pinned down by it.
Yeah.
Kate had this to say about suffering.
It's almost like I wish there was like a spectrum on the word suffering in our ability to even just like tell a story about it. Because I mean, when there's like catastrophic undoing, I meet people all the time where they're like, and I lost my child and now every version of my love just goes to the very bottom of a well. And every story I know how to tell about myself is just, I can't undo it from the story of every bit of beautiful things in my life. Yeah. And I think no amount of massaging that story is going to undo the like deeply bodily way in which this mom loves her kid now gone. But I do hope that like in the way that we think about suffering, I think maybe first when we normalize it, when we just say, you know, like we become more absurdly honest about things, especially in America, like things that we can't change. Also, I really resent all philosophical and religious worldviews that say that we can eradicate our experience of suffering and only endure intermittent pain. Right. I think every version in which we are so terrified we will lose it all, like that is so that has to be to me like the knowledge. That's the bit where like because they're suffering, then we know we have to be people of great courage. I'm like I want to be near that person, not the one who's like actually my life is about suffering management. Thank you.
Here are my takeaways from Act 2. 1, control narratives are offensive. 2, when talking about suffering, mobility is the key distinction. Number 3, A huge range of emotions, even quote unquote negative ones, are vital to our growth. Number 4, suffering indicates attachment. And Claire, Kate, and I are all clearly attached. And number 5, we can't game it. We can't outrun or outthink it. There are tools to manage pain. There are not cures. Here we are at Act 3, a synthesis of where we've been over the past month with Claire Danes and Kate Bowler, digging into the crazy book that came out of this Yale course called Life Worth Living. Act 3 takes us to the only place that an Act 3 could possibly take us: failure and repair, which to my mind are two of the most important ideas and skill sets that any human being could get their head around. We talked about moments in which we feel gross, meaning we are completely at odds with what we know to be our highest values and purpose, and then moments when we feel beautiful, when we feel totally attuned.
I bought a piece of jewelry that was aggressively expensive. And it's because I was feeling really awful in my pregnancy. I was just feeling so hideous and kind of claimed. And it felt naughty. Like it was a naughty purchase.
Is it on your person right now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
It's in, but I was a little angry. Like it was like a slight rebellion, and it didn't even matter what it was so much. It was just that it was too much.
Yeah.
And it was just for me.
Yeah.
Right.
And
You're not like, we're all going to wear it.
nope.
We're actually going to trade it around this table in the next 5 minutes.
But we could, if you want to feel less gross. I'm just
so
saying.
yeah, I felt a little gross, but I felt deviant, and it wasn't gross exactly. I mean, it was. I felt like I was acting out. And it was not that big
of
of
the fuckets.
Yeah, I totally did.
Yeah. If I fly to Indiana and give a speech,
Yeah.
and I come home, I've got like the fuckets. Like I am scanning for something. I want to buy something.
Yeah, I think I felt deprived in some way. And I think that does what, I mean, it was like I was shoplifting, but I bought it, but it was that same kind of impulse. So I don't know if that's gross necessarily, but I was working something out that I probably could have just done in another way.
I have a complicated relationship with money, I think, because almost everything makes me feel gross when it shouldn't. So I think I more just have like an exaggerated view. And I think maybe the gross part is I now have an exaggerated view about what I need that I feel protective about.
Yes.
And I think that is all just because I almost bankrupted my family and my extended family from medical bills when I was sick. So I just get really like...
Yeah, you got to save it and keep it and hold it.
Oh, no, it's mine. And then it's everywhere. And so even like saving up for college for Zach, or, I mean, we're beyond what I ever got, and I was okay. But it's not that. Everything I always have to like spiral it out 20 years.
Right.
And none of that is realistic, but it feels like I would fight you. If you challenged me, I would fight you on this.
Right.
What are you doing when you feel beautiful or just right or in the zone?
I find that when I want to take a picture, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Or I feel beautiful. Like what, when you say feel beautiful, that's the correlation. Like it means that I'm content or I'm happy.
Totally. Settled.
And I think, oh, right. Yeah. It's when I want to capture a moment.
Yeah.
I feel like when I'm listening to the girls and sometimes at some cost to myself, like when I can see that I'm supposed to be somewhere else on my schedule and they're going and I'm just letting them go. Or when they were younger and they would start the big heavy conversation at like 10, 18 at night, which might as well be 4 a.m.
Right.
According to me, like I'm definitely in bed by 9 o'clock. So it's like, what? But kind of sitting up and committing and having them understand that it's like there's no back end here. Like you go, just go ahead.
I can tell when I'm having like a peak feeling, and I can tell because I lose the ability to narrate the situation, which is my ability.
Right.
That's where I'm at my most comfortable. And I've noticed that it's the same situation. I've got my kid and my husband there, and I moved to be 3 minutes away from my best friend and her husband and their 2 little girls.
Do you have slides in your respective yards that go into the wall? I mean,
it could be one notch better.
I did buy, like, my first purchase was bunk beds with a little trundle underneath, and it was totally that feeling. It's like things are always just like this swirly, bad family chaos feeling was familiar to me. And so when I can see them just like buzzy buzz and nothing will happen, you know, like nothing will happen the whole time.
Right.
In the loveliest way.
Yes.
And, you know, we do our little grace and like people are nailing the harmonies, even if there's just too much confidence. It genuinely kills me to see their like entitlement to their own, like, the ease of it. And I'm like, that's it. And like, people know I need to, like, quote, go to the bathroom, which means I go stand and lean against the wall. I'm just like, oh, this is really beautiful. But it's always the feeling that something's beyond me and it hums with and without me. I think that's the bit that, like, kind of gets me.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
It is.
It's so stupid.
She's crying.
Oh, it's fine.
We love her. We know from the book, but we also know from our lives that there's just so much failure. There's terrible ethical failure, character flaws. There's also tiny failures of impatience or irritation or unkindness. There's failures to be the person your kids need you to be in a given moment. And Claire really put her finger on how painful it is to fail in that particular way. And I just think all parents probably need to hear this.
Oh gosh, there's very little that's worse than knowing I've wronged my kid in some way, you know, that I've failed them. Yeah, it's like nauseating.
I know.
And I really need to apologize for my own well-being, because nothing really quells the anxiety until I admit that I've fallen short.
And if you're talking about failure, you're inevitably going to soon be talking about repair and how good you are at apologizing and how patient you are in waiting for the forgiveness you so desire. Here's Claire on that point.
Sometimes it takes them a while to accept the apology because they're still smarting, you know, they're still kind of injured. And that's also tough, but important, you know, and,
for sure.
And helpful for me to sit with.
And of course, apologizing isn't the kind of thing that's evenly distributed over every relationship in our lives. There are apologies that come easily and readily and sincerely, and there are others that we have to kind of wrest from ourselves. Here's Kate on why it's harder to apologize to her husband than her son.
I'm good with my son. He's just so like, oh, thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Oh.
And I just like, wow, I'm learning something about how easy it feels. But I'm great at apologizing to my friends.
How about your husband?
I'm not. Good.
Really? Why do you think that is?
Because Tobin Penner, I hope you're listening. We are usually in an indirect communication loop. So my argument has always been, I would be able to give and receive apologies quickly if it was a clear communication, but I'm usually kind of on pause, waiting for the whole sweater to unravel on the thing. So I find I kind of sit there sort of begrudgingly for a really long time, just sort of waiting for the whole thing to play out. And it's not a good look. I mean, I wish I could, for instance, just accept and give an apology early on in a way that I wasn't sort of waiting for something else to like even up how bad or good I should feel about the situation. I think at a good apology, you're not playing any long game.
Right.
You can settle up your own thing before you've gotten what you deserve.
What I realized when we were talking about apologies is that if you know your why, the how gets a little easier. And so I shared a story about a time when I yelled at my children in a way that I was truly and immediately ashamed of. And then I had this horrifying realization that the reason I had to apologize was so that it didn't happen to them again as adults. There was one time I yelled, and honest to God, I can't remember what it was about, which just says it all. And then I was downstairs in the kitchen, and the kid was upstairs, and I was just breathing it out like, God almighty, Kelly, like, that was insane.
Right.
Like, you went stark raving mad for about 30 seconds there. And, like, God bless us. There's a lot of surface area to motherhood. So there's, I don't know, 5 million minutes. And for 30 seconds, you went bananas. It's not going to be forgotten. But then I just remember going upstairs and saying, you should never let anyone talk to you the way I just talked to you. No boss, no boyfriend,
Right.
no friend,
Right.
nobody.
Yeah.
No camp counselor, no coach.
Yeah.
No one should ever talk to you like that, including me.
Yeah.
Aw.
And I cannot possibly send you into your life thinking that that's like going to happen every so often.
Right,
and
right.
that's how it, adults lose their shit every now and then. It's like they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I did, and God help us all,
Yeah.
But it's a sickening, per your point about the gap between the moment of apology and the moment of forgiveness, like that space in there really belongs to them.
Yeah.
And you are not allowed to rush them through that.
That's right.
Or you're undercutting your apology.
Yeah.
Which is like, you forgive me yet?
Yeah.
Forgive me yet?
Yeah.
You still mad at me? Still
Right.
mad at
It
me?
can't be about you.
Right.
Right.
Finally, all these big ideas and thoughts and dreams of a more morally elevated existence come down to moves we make day by day, even minute by minute, which comes to choices which, if we are grounded in some set of practices, become easier. They become more automatic. We know from talking to Matt and Ryan and Miroslav in the first episode that some practices include going to Mass, having a family meal, putting down your phone for one 24-hour period every week, walking, being with friends, writing in a journal. Here are some of the practices that Kate and Claire suggested.
I have like a hysterically honest, quiet time for a little, and it's not even quiet. I'm basically ranting at what I believe to be a benevolent and omnipotent force. And it's only like 5 to 10 minutes a day kind of thing, but I'm just having it out. I'll just sit there and sometimes I'll do a nice thing where I'll like have candles, and then for the length of the match, I'll like pray for different people. Oh. And I like doing that because each one, it helps me like focus on their needs and praying for them. That's another one. But the one for me, I never prayed this honestly before. And I mean, like really ugly stuff, which I just laugh after because it brings me a certain amount of joy to be like, what are you doing with this?
Right.
I've never had that kind of like freewheeling. I don't feel like I have to be a good person. It was just been wonderful.
This quiet conversation.
I feel less polite about my faith, and it's felt really cathartic.
This is pretty lame-o, but I've been doing yoga because I'm now pregnant, and I usually do hot yoga, which I wasn't allowed to do. But she's a really wonderful teacher, Bethany Lyons. She has this place, Lyons Den, and she's been very, very kind and teaching me directly, and I'm just finding that.
Yeah.
So it's been such a gift because I'm learning a lot from her, specifically about the practice itself, but I think I'm just breathing with her a lot.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm just discovering how helpful that is and powerful. And I think, oh God, and it's so, God, there's nothing cornier or more trite that, it's like how many people have tattoos of breathe on their, the bottom of their backs or whatever. But I'm just starting to kind of realize how centering that is. And how much anxiety that relieves. So
I have a little thing I've been doing, which is I find it very calming to say, who am I serving right now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
if I'm in conversation with someone, it's like, am I serving my own need to get something out or
right.
put my finger on something? Am I trying to serve you? Am I serving my mom? Am I serving Edward? Am I serving Georgia Claire? Like, and then it helps me figure out where to be in it.
Like that.
And it helps me completely drop out on my side. It's like, you can save that for another day. Like, you can get your needs met later today somewhere else. But like right now, you do not need for her to know bip, bop, and bip. You're just receiving. Mm-hmm. And so then that opens up the list of like, keep asking questions, keep validating. and stop yourself from jumping in and accidentally inserting yourself in a way so that you could get a couple little needs met on the side. Like just drop it. And I find it just relaxing. I feel less frantic conversationally when I know who I'm serving. That wraps Act 3. And in lieu of more takeaways, I've compiled a list of practices. You might even call them micro practices, which I've been using to remind myself what game I'm playing, what race I'm running, and that character is built when no one is looking. Number 1, be genuinely nice to customer service people. Number 2, tip everyone. Number 3, ask 3 questions at least before you state an opinion. Number 4, hop up and do some yoga poses every couple hours. Not for your posture or your triceps, but so you can be more alive in every conversation. Number 5, try Friday faves. That means call someone you love and miss every Friday to say hello. Number 6, say the words "I was wrong" more often, even in the smallest matters, like when you misremember a name of a movie or you took a left when you should have taken a right, to show yourself and others that being wrong happens all the time and it's not a crisis. Number 7, try to make people laugh in Zoom calls, just for a minute, by being a little more human and unguarded, a little more detailed in your answer to "How are you?" That's a better call. Since life on a lot of days is just one call after another, you will see improvement quickly. Number 8, as many other people have said, write more thank you notes, like 1 or 2 a week, which means unless you have something that you're celebrating, that you'll be thanking people for different kinds of things, following up with you, showing you a small kindness, remembering something that was important. And number 9 comes from a listener. Her name is Lisa. She said her parents always said to her, "Give your life away." She spent 43 years as an oncology nurse. She thought it went pretty well. Speaking of thank yous, I want to thank Tammy Stedman, who does this work with me every day, with great humor and generosity and insight. I want to thank Melissa Williams, who has made so many cool projects possible over the last 20 years. I want to thank technical producer Dean Kateri, my listener engagement pals Rachel Hicks and Charlie Upchurch, our graphics guy Gagi, and of course, big thanks to Claire Danes, Kate Bowler, and my friends at Yale, Miroslav Wolf, Matthew Krosman, and Ryan McAnally-Lintz, for this book of books that has helped me think so clearly about what matters and how I want to be in the world. Thank you to the Yale Divinity School, the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, Evan Rosa, and the Warren Smoot Carter III and Meagan Carter Charitable Fund. Finally, thanks to you all for listening. We'll be back on Friday with a new For the Good of the Order and on Sunday with a new Thanks for Being Here. Meanwhile, reach out anytime. Our email is hello@kellycorrigan.com. Thanks, everyone.
The Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. This episode featured Kelly Corrigan, Kate Bowler, and Claire Danes. Production assistance by Macie Bridge, Kaylen Young, and Logan Ledman. I'm Evan Rosa, and I edit and produce the show. Special thanks to Tammy Stedman and Kelly Corrigan for making this possible, as well as the Warren Smoot Carter III and Meagan Carter Charitable Fund. For more information, visit us online at faith.yale.edu, where you can find past episodes of the podcast, articles, books, videos, and other educational resources that help people envision and pursue lives worthy of our humanity. Thanks for listening, friends. We'll be back with more soon.